Okay, guys, very welcome back to the show. And I've got a special guest on the show today. His name is Mr. John Walters. You may have seen this man on the screens over the years in WWE, Ring of Honor, and AEW television, just to name a few. John, thanks for coming on today, man.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you on, man. You've had a storied career, and we're going to kind of kick into that now. And I know Jack wants to talk about your training first and foremost, I think.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, John, thanks for coming on. I noticed in doing the research for this interview tonight that you are a trainee of Killer Kowalski, and we've had several individuals that have gone on to successful careers like yourself in the business that were trained under Kowalski's leadership. What was it about that training that seemed to result in such excellent wrestlers?
I think when you have a name like Killer Kowalski and he's got a wrestling school in the area, and then not that the other wrestling schools weren't good, but of course you're going to go to the top person, the guy who's been in the WWF or the Hall of Fame. So naturally, that's where most people are going to go. So that was just a wrestling school I think a lot of people chose. And the head trainer at Kowalski's was a man named Mike Hollow, who's actually still training. I'm actually up in the New England area right now. I don't live here anymore, but this is where I'm from. And I actually got to see him this week and catch up with him, and he's still training people. There's a lot of good wrestling schools in New England. It's always kind of been a hotbed for independent wrestling. It's a very tight-knit group, and there's a lot of good wrestling schools up here. And I think Kowalski kind of laid the foundation for that area because he was a Boston guy, trained Triple H, trained Perry Saturn. So the reputation kind of went along with his school. So I think when the product of his training was seen on national television, people naturally were going to choose that path.
Yeah, you mentioned Triple H and some of the standouts that Kowalski trained. Did you ever have any interplay with Triple H while at the school? Like we've heard some folks say used to stop by, that sort of thing.
I never did see him at the school. I think he probably stopped by a lot more before I started. I started in 2000, and by then I think he was on the road full time, and he was that was obviously the Attitude Era. DX and all that stuff. So I think he was traveling a lot, but I know he stayed in touch with Killer and they chatted a lot. And obviously at his funeral, I saw him, which is not the best situation. You're not going to talk to somebody like that. And then I was brought in a lot early in the 2000s for dark matches and TVs. And I had some brief conversations with him at the time. But I know he always kept a really good relationship with Walter. And from what I heard, he funded his funeral and also bought all his old memorabilia and kind of stored it somewhere in the WWE headquarters. So definitely appreciated where he came from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. John, how did that initial call to go work in WWE happen for you? How did it kind of come about?
So Mike Hollow, who was the head trainer of Kowalski's, and then obviously Walter Kowalski had a relationship with the WWE. He was in contact with him, and we were kind of the school that WWE picked from for dark matches, for extra work, for skits. So I think it was in 2001 or 2002. It was pretty soon after I started my training, maybe a year in, where they started using my class for extra work. I didn't get a match until I think 2002, which is a good thing because I wasn't ready to be in front of 12,000 people 6 months into my training. So I was mainly used for skits. Dark matches came later, but when I first started going backstage, it was more like skits and stuff like that. The Big Show threw a burrito in my face one skit and threw me over a table. I was a cop a couple times, security guard. We did a skit at a gay bar once in Rhode Island during the APA and Chuck and Billy. Remember that little feud there? So yeah. So a lot of that work early on, and then after that, when they started seeing how guys could work in the ring, then I started getting more matches.
Yeah, we actually had Chris Nelson on the show a couple of weeks back. You probably know Chris, and he said one of his biggest paydays was for doing extra work one night when he wasn't even in the ring. He said he had to do 10 jumping jacks backstage, and he got paid, I think, double. He said of his normal kind of match rate, which is crazy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, just being back there, because obviously that's the dream. You want to get into the WWE. So even if you're just doing a skit, but you're getting paid and you have a paycheck from WWE, that's a cool thing, regardless of what the role is. Obviously, I don't think anybody got into wrestling school and took all these bumps to be a security guard in a skit, but got to start somewhere. And that's how a lot of people get their breaks. I remember Paul London did that thing with what was it with Ric Flair where he got hit at ringside and then he got signed right after that. So, I know there's so many different ways to make it. You got guys that were seen as a bouncer at a club, and 5 years later they're making millions of dollars. And then there's guys who do the indies for 30 years and never get a break. It's like show business or music. It's not fair, but it is what it is. So.
Yeah. Jack?
So backing it up a bit, you were part of the original Ring of Honor in that heyday. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about Ring of Honor. First being, how did you first get booked by them through? I believe it was Gabe Sapolsky.
Yeah,
became aware of your work.
Yeah, Gabe was the booker at the time. I had sent Ring of Honor a tape, and back then it was VHS tapes in a resume 8x10. Never heard from them. So Gary Michael Capetta, the old WCW ring announcer, I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yes.
He was doing his book tour. He had just I don't remember what year this was, maybe 2002, 2003. He was doing his book tour. He wrote a book and he was touring across the country, giving speeches and selling his book. And he came to the wrestling school I was at and gave his speech. And I helped carry his books back to his van where he was going on to the next event. And he asked me, "Where are you next?" I said, "Well, I'll be at this show on Saturday or Sunday. I don't remember the day." And he said, "Well, I'll be there." So Gary came and he watched my match. And I wrestled Luis Ortiz, who was a New England stand, one of my favorite opponents. And we had a really good match. And Gary took it upon himself to contact Gabe on my behalf. He messaged Gabe and said, "You got to look at this guy." And then I think it was a week later, I was driving home from an indie show and I got a call from Gabe saying that he wanted to bring me in. So that was it. Sometimes it's knowing somebody, but knowing somebody only gets you so far. You got to produce when you get that chance too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read that you teamed with Jimmy Rave against the Briscoes, and looking back at their legacy, did you when you were facing them, did you have that sense that they were an all-time great tag team?
Yeah, because I don't think the Briscoe brothers, it seems so effortless for them. Like who they were on camera is really who they are. Toned down. They're very mild man. I mean, I speak about Jay in the present tense. Obviously, he's gone, but very mild mannered, polite, quiet people. And then on TV, they still are these chicken farmers from Delaware. You know what I mean? But they turn it up in the wrestling ring. But I've said it on my Facebook page and social media. I mean, those guys, working with them was such an honor because there's some guys that it's all about themselves and the matches are all about what they can do. And those guys never were pushy. They're never like, "I want to do this and this." It was always, "Hey, let's just put a good match together." And I think they were just so good that, like I said, effortless for them. And, Jay passing, that was terrible. And I say you can be a good wrestler, but being a good human being is even more important. He was just very, very quality. I mean, I remember going back to Ring of Honor in 2020 during the pandemic and doing some tapings. I hadn't seen those guys in probably 14 years, and treated me like I was their brother still from that they've seen last weekend. So it was very sad. But yeah, those days were monumental. The early Ring of Honor days were cool, and I miss it. But now they're on television. Of course, that the style has to be changed a little bit when you're on mainstream TV. You can't kind of have this super.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like back then, you almost felt like you're watching something that you shouldn't be watching, kind of like ECW, and it was a lot of technical wrestling and high flying, which is fine. But when they got to TV, I think a lot of the complaints from some of the fans were it's not the same Ring of Honor. But like anything, right? Everything evolves and changes over time.
Maurice, I'll throw to you before my next Ring of Honor question.
Yeah, well, actually, I think we kind of had the same question about CM Punk in Ring of Honor, and you often hear like different things about Phil Brooks, the man. What was your kind of experience like with him?
I actually saw Punk 2 weeks ago in Hartford at the AEW tapings for the first time in 20 years. And really? I have never had a problem with him. I think my opinion of Punk is he's very opinionated. He's very passionate. He's very principled. And if he gets any inkling that you're a weasel or you're trying to undercut him, then you're his enemy. And I respect that. The whole thing that happened, he gave me his side of it, and he literally like embraced me the minute he saw me, and we've haven't seen each other in a long time. Anytime I put a match together with that guy, or I was backstage, or I don't think we did travel once together. he's always been the same person to me. So I always say treat people, judge people how they treat you, not the stories you hear. And wrestling's like any business, right? Personalities clash sometimes. You're not going to like everybody you work with. You go to an office building, or you go to a restaurant, or you go to a department store, and you're working with people. Not everybody's going to get along. It doesn't mean one person's bad, one's good. It just means that you just don't click. But wrestling, it's about the fans. So I think people should put their differences together and try to put the best product out there. But who am I to say how people should feel? So I've always got along with him, had good matches with him, and like I said, I saw him last week for the first time in ages, and he treated me the same as he always did.
Nice. Jack?
In terms of your character, I wanted to ask you that I found interesting and found some of the material on YouTube when you were with Lucha Libre USA. That whole extremist character that you came up with that got the nuclear heat about the anti-immigration and all the mainstream coverage. What was the inspiration for that, and were you surprised how it really took hold?
Not surprised, because when you're talking to a certain demographic about immigration where they take it so serious, you're going to hit some nerves, even though it is theater. When they first approached me about the character, it was kind of like, it was a little different. Like, we want you to be, Jan Brewer is the governor of Arizona. She's the one that passed this really strict immigration law. We want you to be her son. We never said I was her son. I'm sure like parody laws probably would have covered us from a lawsuit, but she knew who I was, and she had been told about it many times. But I kind of just had to allude to my mother being this powerful woman who doesn't take shit from immigrants, So I was basically to play her son. But the first character pitch was kind of like, we want you to be this mama's boy, frat boy. And I'm like, well, that's not me. I can't be some guy that comes out with spiked hair and sunglasses. If you want me to be a political kind of angle on this character and be this ultra conservative who not only just doesn't like immigrants, but I don't like what the wrestling business has become with all these flips, and I don't want women in the ring, just kind of this over the top extreme version of a right winger. Then I said, I can play that perfectly, and I will. And it kind of just morphed into its own. I kind of wrote my own stuff with their approval, of course, except for the one time I was at a show in Arizona, and I grabbed the microphone and I said, if Obama didn't start securing the border, I was going to kick his ass. And I got talked to about that. Like, you can't threaten the president. So that was kind of a bummer, but no, it was fun, man. That was awesome. It was crazy because they built it so well, and we did a lot of press locally. I'd fly out a few days before and do like the Spanish radio station. We would do Univision and some of the talk shows. So whenever I got to town and they would just show my emblem up on the screen, or my music would hit, instant boos. And when you get instant heat like that, you don't have to do as much as you do on a show where they don't know who you are. So a lot of fun. And
given that white hot heat that you had, were you ever concerned, in some markets that I know it's the modern era and wrestling is viewed as, a form of entertainment, but were you ever concerned for your safety for pissing some people off too much?
Ultra concerned, no. Slightly concerned at shows where you see people in the back, yeah, maybe a little bit. There was a couple times, like, I always kind of went out privately. I never went out for autograph signings. I never was seen at these events beforehand, handing out shirts or whatever. And I always kind of went back out into the street with a car, like a separate car from everybody else. Did I ever feel super? There was a lot of the Latinos fans that would be waiting for me to get a picture with me because, in the end, it's wrestling, right? You can just suspend your beliefs and not be so sensitive about everything all the time. But definitely sometimes where I got some inbox messages on Facebook, like, oh, come to this city, I'll kick your ass. It's all. I mean, if you can't tell the difference between make believe and real, then you probably have bigger problems than what a wrestler's saying.
And you did a good job portraying the character.
The guys that are sending.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it was fun.
Sending you DMs.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
Those guys are not going to show up to kick your ass.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, and it's funny because my parents are immigrants. I'm first generation American, but it was always kind of like, listen, it's more about the mask and the culture, and the reason they're wearing masks is because they're illegal and they're wanted, and this style of wrestling doesn't belong here. I'm going to deport them all. I'm going to take their mask as trophies because that's so personal to them. I cut some pretty scathing promos. I speak Spanish, so I would speak like, half a promo in Spanish and then tell them that I learned that 5 minutes ago and you've all been in my country for 20 years. You don't know how to speak English. Just some corny, hokey wrestling stuff, but it worked. I got full beer cans thrown at me. Nothing, no bodily fluids like they do in Puerto Rico, but definitely push the envelope. Yeah, it was fun.
There's a couple of fan questions in here. I'm just going to pull up one of them for now. We mightn't have enough time to get through them, but was Bob Holly as stiff with you as he was with other wrestlers?
Stiff, yes. Reckless, no. Very safe, very hard hitting. In fact, I wrestled him twice on Velocity. The first match, I remember Bob Holly and I don't know if it was an intimidation thing. He came up to me. He's like, "Oh, I like to call all my matches in the ring." I said, "Oh, cool, me too." And I don't think he was expecting that. By the time we went out, everything was planned. I think he was kind of trying to see how I would react. He hit very hard, but not one time did I feel like he was trying to hurt me. Did I feel unsafe when he does that thing where you're hanging on the ropes and he kicks you in the stomach? I didn't even feel it. And when I got to the back, he gave me a little feedback. He's like, "Oh, you kind of shied on my drop kick a little bit," but he enjoyed it. And then the second time I worked with him, which might have been a year later, I don't know how much later it was, I wrestled him and I knew what he was like. And I remember that we opened up, I locked up with him, took him to the corner, hit him with the hardest chops I ever hit. And he liked it. He literally gave me a big hug afterwards. And I remember Teddy Long coming up to me and telling me, he's like, "That's how you work with Bob Holly." And I think Bob got off on being stiff back. So from what I heard from other interviews, he was a hard hitter, but he never wouldn't take it back. So, there's opinions about him. I hear people say, "Oh, he was a bully in the locker room." And there might be some truth to that. I never personally saw it, but we also don't know if he was being told from the higher ups, "Hey, you're going to be this enforcer. We need you to be the jerk of the locker room." We don't know what's agreed to. So I can just tell, based on my experiences in my matches with him, that I felt very comfortable in there with him. You definitely felt it. You felt his chops and his forearms for sure, but that's wrestling. It's not ballet. So it didn't bother me, but good experiences with him. Yeah. I know a lot of people don't have the same story, but I didn't have an issue with him.
Yeah, you touched on the locker room there. What was the locker room environment like around that time from 02 to 05?
Well, I was going so often. I mean, there was one point I remember doing like 3 or 4 dark matches a month. Pretty much whenever they were on the East Coast from New Hampshire all the way down to like Virginia, I was doing those shows. So a lot of the guys started to know me, especially the guys I had worked with. And very professional locker room. It's different now. Back then you hear a lot about the hazing in the wrestlers' court and a lot of like kind of the immature bullying. I don't think that happens anymore. When you're a publicly traded company, you got stocks and stuff, and the world is so sensitive as it is now. Not that anybody should be bullied or hazed or, the shit shouldn't be put in your bag, but I think ribs and stuff like that back then were a lot more reckless, and now it's kind of more professional. It's just the stories you hear. I haven't been back there in a long time, but I was never uncomfortable there. But also, when you're a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid, and there's these guys you watch on TV, it can be a little intimidating. So you're kind of walking on eggshells, and you're trying not to piss anybody off. You're trying not to forget to shake somebody's hand, and wrestling is weird. You got these really jacked, big, tough guys, but some of them are the most sensitive babies in the world. And if you don't shake everybody's hand, you should. But sometimes somebody might be busy. They might be talking to somebody you don't want to interrupt. And then it's like, "Oh, you didn't shake my hand." It's like any human being can tell if someone's an arrogant jerk or if somebody just clearly forgot to shake your hand. And you can't expect much. If I'm at a wrestling school with a bunch of 17, 18-year-old kids and they don't come up and shake my hand, I'm not going to be, "Well, they don't know respect." Like, well, maybe they're shy. Like, maybe I can go up to them and say something. So, there's some of those time-tested traditions in wrestling, and I don't really believe in all of them. But I think you should acknowledge everybody that's there and shake people's hands. But there's definitely there was some immaturity, I think, from some of the stories you hear, especially some of the old guys that told you the stories about being bullied and all that. But I never felt uncomfortable. There was definitely some kind of what's the word I'm looking for, like passive aggressive ribs, like, "Oh, this guy didn't shake your hand," but they were joking. You know what I mean? I think a lot of it is how you sell it, they say. And if you're confident in yourself, you're going to be fine. So yeah, I didn't have any issues. The AEW locker room now is night and day because I know 90% of the people there. So there's so many Ring of Honor guys and indie guys. So when I went back there a couple weeks ago, it was literally like an indie show to me. So I'm like, I know all these guys personally. So I think it's where you are on the card, where you are in your career. You're going to react differently to locker rooms.
Yeah. Jack?
Speaking of ribs and tough guys, I wanted to get your thoughts on your working with Chris Benoit. I understand he had some, complimentary remarks about your work and just your experience there dealing with him.
Yeah, so I think the first several times I went and did dark matches, I didn't really talk to him. I think it was basically like, "Hi, nice to see you again," or "Hi, I'm John." But I remember the match specifically. I wrestled another indie guy and I, Arch Kincaid, who was another chaotic Kowalski guy. We wrestled the Hurricane and Rosie on Sunday Night Heat. This was in 2004, I believe. And I remember after the match, I was back there with Shane Helms. He's giving me advice, make sure you're give me more heat, blah, blah, blah. So I turned around and Benoit was like an inch away from my face staring at me. And I just turned around and he's just like, his exact words were, "You impressed the fuck out of me." That's what he said to me. And I was like, "Well, I'm going to take this opportunity." I was like, "Thank you so much." He's like, "Yeah, you hit him good. You sold good." I was like, so I sat down. He sat down with me, asked me who trained me and this and that. So I was like, "I'm going to take advantage of this." I said, "Can I send you some of my tapes so you can watch some of my stuff?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, he gave me his email address. I emailed him and he responded. I sent him a tape. The next several times I saw him, he was friendly, but kind of short. It was like, "Hey, nice to see you." I never said, "Hey, did you watch my tape?" I wasn't going to go there. But he always kind of was nice. And then I remember I wrestled Chris Masters on Raw, kind of a squash match. And I remember the next night, you guys remember AOL, America Online? I got a little AOL message. It said Wolverine One Sports sent you a message. So I'm guessing because we exchanged emails, my screen name was saved in his contacts. And he said, "Hey, John, it's Benoit." And I was like, "Oh, hey." He's like, "Great match with Chris Masters." And I was just like, I got squashed. But he's like, "Yeah, you threw good forearms." He's like, "Only thing you can do in that situation is do the best, and then somewhere down the line, someone will do the same for you." He's like, "How come you haven't got signed yet?" I was like, I don't know. I was like, "Maybe I'm too small." And he's like, "That's bullshit." He said, keep doing what you're doing. And you hear a lot of stories from indie guys that Benoit was very helpful. I think if he saw a little of himself in you, he was always willing to help out because his passion was wrestling, and he was a guy who was told a million times he was too small, and he ended up winning the championship. So, we exchanged emails here and there, and whenever I was backstage, he was always kind of friendly and gave advice. That was the extent of it. And then, when everything went down, it was just like, oh my God. It's like, I know a lot of guys who knew him personally, and from what I saw, not one of them was really that surprised with what happened. Of course, that's extreme, but they could tell that he was kind of depressed and his mind was not there. So when you look at the whole situation, as sad as it was, you add up everything: the depression, the marital problems, Eddie Guerrero dying, he's on ECW now, the drugs. It shouldn't be that surprised that something like that happened. And it's a shame because some people say concussion, some people say steroids. My opinion is he's just ultimate consumption with wrestling was really all he had. And he just kind of forgot that there was other things outside of that. And maybe he was just so focused on it that Eddie dying and the depression of being kind of demoted to ECW. And then also the prescription drugs he was on. I heard he was on some antidepressants and stuff. All that stuff can be a cocktail for disaster. So it's not that surprising. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more, not just in wrestling, just in general. But in terms of pro wrestling, aside from what happened, I mean, one of the best ever. And to get a sign of approval from him was definitely something that was pretty cool in my career.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that all that happened and overshadowed his accomplishments, but he, I think, was known in the industry for helping the young guys out. I caught a clip of an interview with him talking about Hogan and how Hogan would big league people, and he always took time out. So
yeah, and he was the opposite. I mean, I think he saw Hogan as a guy who was like, "Hey, I'm here to make as much money as I can, put myself over." And you hear a lot of stories about that with Hogan, but Benoit was like the complete opposite. He's a guy who just wants to give back. So, yeah, it's a tragedy what happened, man. But everyone's got their opinion and judgment. But in the end, it's just was definitely a black eye on wrestling. Not good.
Did you ever have any experience with Vince McMahon personally, John, over the years of been working there, albeit as an extra or in the ring?
The only thing I remember in my interaction with Vince McMahon was WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden. I was back there. I was one of the Druids for The Undertaker. And at the end, he just shook everybody's hand and said, "Thanks for coming." But that was it. Other than that, I had seen him in the past, but everyone's like, just you don't go up and talk to him. He's so think about being in charge of television. You don't go up and speak to somebody like that. But if he'd walk by, hi guys, cordial, but no interactions at all in that.
There's a question here. Was Undertaker a locker room leader, and did you see him as a leader? Speaking of the man in WrestleMania 20.
I didn't spend enough time back there with an actual contracted talent to be able to answer that question. From what I understand and from what I saw, he was kind of one of those silent leaders who, if something really needed to be settled, he would take care of it. But I think from what I get, it was more of like he was more respected as how long his career lasted and how kind of quiet he was. You know what they say, the loudest guy in a bar is usually not the toughest, and that he walked around kind of quiet and stoic, and that gave him that reputation of being kind of a locker room leader. And I mean, think about somebody whose character survived how many spans, right? That guy was there from the time he debuted at that Survivor Series with Brother Love, and he comes back, and he's, what did he retire 2 years ago? To think he was the top guy for all these years with all these great matches. I mean, that alone makes you a locker room leader. I think this year. Just that, but you didn't hear a lot of stories about him getting in fights or getting busted for drugs or making a fool out of himself at a bar. So I think when you look at all that together, he probably was a locker room leader. But I don't know the guy personally. Just literally a handshake once or twice. But some of my friends who know him well have said that he's always been a pretty stand-up guy.
During
when we
the time
about,
sorry, go ahead, Maurice.
You go ahead there.
Go
Jack.
ahead.
No, you go ahead there, Jack.
You were there during a time frame that we've heard some stories from folks backstage about the and you touched on it briefly in terms of the hazing and that bullying culture. Did you ever see any of that firsthand, or did you avoid all of that?
Yeah, not me personally. Like I said, I remember one time Billy Gunn and Bob Holly, right before my first match, Billy Gunn was like, "This kid's not ready for you. He's too small. You're going to fuck him up." But I think they were just messing around. I had a drill sergeant football coach in college who literally tried to break us every day. So for me, I wasn't going to give up on my dream because somebody was kind of, subconsciously bullying. I didn't even take that as bullying. I think the guys they're just hazing me. It's not a big deal. There's a difference between trying to get in somebody's head before a match and stealing their stuff or like slashing their tires. I mean, that kind of malicious, illegal stuff is one thing, right? But just kind of busting somebody's balls or like, I was insensitive to that kind of stuff. Obviously, where there's smoke, there's fire. You've heard endless stories of it, but I never saw it. I never experienced it. So no, I can't really comment on that. But obviously, there's a lot of stories about some of that stuff happening, and there's levels to it, right? I think minor razzing is okay. Friends do it to each other. But when you start messing with people's stuff and stealing their keys and like misplacing their phone, and that could be life or death, right? Your wife calling something's wrong with the kid and your phone's missing. It's like there's some immaturity there. But from what I gather, that stuff's not really there anymore.
Yeah. One of your ex tag team partners that we had on this show, you tagged with him a couple of times, was a victim to that. Chad Wicks. What did you make of Chad?
Yeah, I had heard that stories. I haven't talked to Chad in a long time, but yeah, he started at Kowalski's. I don't remember how many years after me. He was maybe 4 or 5 years after me. One of the hardest workers. Super positive to the point where you thought he was ribbing you because of how positive he was. He'd have these like inspirational quotes on his voicemail. He'd go to like rest areas and like do push-ups and stuff. He was definitely a character, but I had some good matches with him, and I definitely heard about what happened to him, that he was, they were trying to get him and his partner to fight, and they ended up fighting at some point and, locking him in bathrooms and throwing his gear out. So, but I think the reason Chad was probably a victim to that is because of that positivity I was telling you about, which is so perverse to say. It's like the guy's so positive.
Too nice.
Yeah. But I can see kind of why. I'm not saying why they did it, because like I said, extreme hazing shouldn't be tolerated. But there was times where people were like, is this guy legit? Like people who didn't know him, like that's really how he is 24 hours a day. But he loved wrestling. He was good at it. He had passion and worked out like a horse. Sometimes it's timing of where things are and when you get your break. So yeah, he would be able to tell those stories better. But I did see a podcast when he was telling that story one time about, it was at like a hotel bar where he like locked everybody into a bathroom. Did you hear that story? He locked the Undertaker into the bathroom. Yeah. So Yeah, I don't want to go through that stuff, but I definitely, I can definitely say, well, Chad's definitely a target for that because of how nice he is, and which shouldn't be the case. If you're nice, you're nice. Leave nice people alone. Go after the assholes, right? So
Exactly.
yeah.
Jack.
You touched on your role at WrestleMania in 2004, but the night before that, you had on SmackDown a really high profile match against the Big Show. What was your experience like working with Paul there, the fellow Kowalski trainee?
Yeah, we did two matches with him. Arch Kincaid and myself did two handicap matches against the Big Show, and I don't remember how far apart they were. But I remember him telling us specifically, he's like, "I'm not going to stiff you guys. I'm not going to hurt you like some of these other guys do. I'm just here to kind of get me over, and I'm going to give you this." I remember the chops. It's one of the most lethal things I've ever felt in my life. I mean, I literally felt like I was shot. That's how you naturally just sell it down. And I took the choke slam, and but a very nice guy. I remember after one of them, whether the first time or the second time, he offered to put us up in a hotel. I think we were in Atlantic City. He's like, "I'll pay for your guys' hotel tonight." And we declined because we were driving back home because I think one of us had to work our real job. But he was very polite. And then every time I saw him after that, he remembered it. And then I did a skit with him backstage when him and Eddie Guerrero were feuding where I was eating a burrito and Big Show came by and I was hiding it because I guess the week prior, Eddie Guerrero put like a laxative in his burrito, and there was so we were all eating burritos, and I was hiding it, and he stuffed my face in it and threw me over a table. Well, we took like 2 or 3 takes to film that, and I remember the first time he put the burrito in my face and threw me at the table, and they wanted me to go over it, but I sold it like I hit the table and went back. So he was gently, politely taking like the beans out of my nose and wiping my face. He's like kind of like a gentle giant, you know. So yeah, I have good experiences, and talk about a guy. You know what I like about him is if you see some of his interviews, he'll tell you when he first started he was an asshole. You know, his first feud was against Hulk Hogan, and he didn't understand the business. And he'll tell you that it was his attitude early on that sucked, and I think he really changed and became a draw. And what a great worker for somebody that big to be able to move the way he moved. Yeah, all my experiences with him were good. He was very nice.
Yeah, and like if we look at the up until the present day, anyway, we'll touch on you worked on AEW Dark last year, and I watched the match earlier, and it was kind of like a throwback match to like some of the old kind of enhancement matches in the WWF and WCW. Although you got a bit more leeway maybe than a lot of those matches, and we were talking about it last night in an interview. We were saying how annoying it was looking back on some of these old enhancement matches when they're rolling VTs during them or talking about a pay-per-view that's coming up or something. But in your match, I think, who was it that was commentating in the match? They were very complimentary of you as well. And it was nice to see.
I think it was Mark Henry and somebody else. I don't remember who the other one was.
It was Mark Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Henry, maybe Taz.
But what was
that? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just how did that appearance on Dark come about, or did that come together with the kind of amalgamation of Ring of Honor then as well?
I'm close with a lot of the guys there, a lot of the writers, and it was in Georgia. I lived in Florida at the time, and I'd never gone there. And I said, well, my friend reached out. He's like, "Do you want to do go up for TV?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's fine. I'll do it." And when they were doing the Darks, they were filming so many matches in an hour period, and by the time we were the last match, TV was starting in like 8 minutes. So they're basically like, you guys got to cut it to like 4 minutes. And when you're an enhancement guy, whether or not you're there, your experience, your job is to do whatever they tell you. So it was a short match. I think I did like 2 moves, and it was what it was. Does that hurt me in the future? No, because I think most of the people who are watching wrestling know that, hey, just because he's there doing this job this time doesn't mean he's not good or he doesn't have more to show. No, it was fine. I mean, I would have liked to have a longer match, and I hope that opportunity comes somewhat soon. But it was an enhancement match. I was there to put a contracted guy over and just kind of make it look good. And again, I hadn't wrestled in like a year, and if they had wanted me to go 15, 20 minutes, I probably couldn't have. I would have done it fine. But yeah, it was just kind of one of those things where, hey, do a dark match. And then while I was there, they had asked me if I could be a judge for at the Ring of Honor pay-per-view in Boston. So they flew me up there, which was great because I spent an extra day with my family. And I judged the match in Boston from where I'm from. So yeah, I mean, enhancement matches are what they are, and nobody says, "Oh, I want to be an enhancement guy," but at that night, that's what they needed, and that's what I did, and yeah, it was what it was.
You
And
spoke
they've
of
got a massive show coming up over here soon as well.
Yeah, I know, and there's still a lot of tickets. I hear that's pretty impressive.
They've sold more than SummerSlam 1992 as of today.
That's what I heard. That's awesome.
I just wanted to get your
Jack.
thoughts on your experience there in the locker room. I don't know whether you're familiar with the recent comments by Canadian independent wrestler LeFisto, and she had in her own personal experience a negative one, but that seemed to come out of one angle that we haven't heard of the AEW locker room. Do you have your thoughts because you've been in so many locker rooms? How does that environment compare to some of the other ones? Better, the same, or some negative aspects?
So I'm back up here in New England right now visiting family. So I've gone to some of the local wrestling schools, just to say hello, give back, roll around a little bit. Because I only get up here a couple times a year. And I just heard this week about what went down with her. And I always say, like I said earlier, when you asked me my opinion of Punk, wrestling is full of different personalities. And a lot of times so much is lost in translation. I think what lacks in the world, not just in wrestling, but everything, and a lot of it's because of social media, is communication, right? It's just people don't know how to communicate anymore. Serious breakups and arguments happen over Facebook Messenger instead of people calling each other and talking or sitting down over a cup of coffee. So you'll hear, how it is. There's three sides to a story: hers, his, and the truth, right? There's always multiple factors into stories when it comes to wrestling heat, and people love the Bucks, they hate Punk, vice versa. How do you know that they all just had this kind of personality clash, and they had difference of opinions, and the way they handled it was the way they handled it? I don't get involved in other people's drama other than my own, and I try to have no drama in my life. But I did hear it, and in terms of the locker room in AEW, I've been back there twice. Once, one Ring of Honor, 2 AEW tapings, and it's been nothing but good for me. I'm not saying what other people say is false. I'm just saying that I can't comment on it because I've never seen it. If I thought it was this toxic locker room and I felt uncomfortable, I wouldn't be back there. So, but there could be truth to it. I don't know. It could be completely false. It could be completely true. I don't know. I don't know. I think is the beef that she wasn't treated properly. Is that what it was? I don't really know much.
Well, that she was kind of like walking into an ice box, and nobody would tell her what they wanted to do in the match, and then the match kind of fell apart, the 6-man that she had, and then she received some very negative feedback from Dustin in the back.
Okay, I did hear that this week. Yeah. That goes back to communication, right? I mean, if you look at WWE and Vince McMahon, the top guys, right, that made millions and millions of dollars, none of them are going to say anything negative about them, but then the guys who might have felt slighted or might have got fired or reamed out have something opposite to say. And that could be the same case with AEW or any wrestling promotion or any job. So I've worked for bosses and work outside of wrestling where I've loved them, and other people, I can't stand that person. And there's been other people who are just, society loves them. I'm like, this person's a phony. So that's between them. You know what I mean? But if you're asking me personally if I've seen anything like that, I haven't.
Fair enough.
Diplomatic answer, right?
It's your experience.
The truth, yeah.
Yeah. John, there's a story on the internet, and if it's on the internet, it's got to be true.
I'm ready to verify it.
For Tough Enough Series 1. Is it true that you applied for that, but they thought you were too experienced to go into the competition?
Yeah, it was kind of weird because I went down with Chris Nowinski because Chris Nowinski was was training at Kowalski's. We went down together for the tryout. We drove down, and they knew my experience beforehand. When I sent them a tape, it showed me doing moves and stuff like that. And then when I got there, it was kind of like I made it to like the second round, and they I don't remember if it was directly said to me, you have too much experience, but I think at some point somebody said like, oh yeah, we're really looking for beginners. And maybe when they first started casting for the show, they were looking for experienced people. Because if you know anything about wrestling, things change all the time, maybe 10 times a second. And what they're looking for one day may not be the next day. I mean, remember the time WWE only wanted guys over 6'1", 230, then they didn't want indie guys, then they did want indie guys, then they didn't want older people, then they were signing older people. So this could have been one of those cases where, hey, let's just take everybody in here for casting purposes for the show, and then we can just send them home. I'm glad I didn't go on the show. I don't think I would have liked it. But at the time, I was only like, I think 2 years in, and I went down to Chris Nowinski, and of course he made it to the show. But no, I nothing negative about the show. I obviously, a lot of experienced guys don't like the concept of Tough Enough because, you're learning how to be a pro wrestler in a month, 2 months. It's not really realistic. But I mean, look at Morrison, right? He was on there, and Maven got a contract, and I thought Maven was pretty underrated as a worker. So yeah, I mean, it was what it was. But I did go, and I did go down for, I think it was one night, maybe 2 nights, and but I didn't make it on the show. So, but I got over that quick.
Jack.
Well, I want to thank you for your time tonight, John. It's appreciated. But in terms of your career, what would you consider to be your preeminent highlight? And as well, not that you're done, what are your future goals in the wrestling business?
To be honest, if I never wrestle again, I'm fine. In fact, in the past 6 years, I've probably had 10 matches. So in 2015, I stopped wrestling full time. And then in 2018, I was back in New England for 4 months in between moves. I had just left California, and I was here for 4 months visiting family. And I decided to pick up some indie shows, and I did about 8 shows in like 2 months. And I said, well, I still got it. I can still go. But when I measure my life and my situation, I'm healthy, and I don't have any injuries, and I've been pretty successful outside of wrestling, where I don't want to ruin that or sacrifice anything I've made in my life over a bad bump. But for the right opportunity, the right company, even in a non-wrestling role, a coaching role or a training role, I would be open to it because I still love the business, but I don't need it personally or emotionally or financially. Doesn't mean I wouldn't want to be part of it, or I don't. But I don't. It's kind of one of those weird things where it's like, yeah, whatever. If something comes, an offer comes, great. If not, I'm just going to continue about my day and my life the way I normally do. So it's kind of a nice position to be in, because you know how it is when people put all their eggs in one basket and it doesn't work out. They get depressed, they get suicidal, they don't have anything to back up on. They spent all their money traveling, doing indie shows and making no money. So I've tried to keep a balance between dedicating myself to the craft, but also keeping some good investments outside of wrestling. And that's definitely helped me be picky and choosy on where I work. So, but in terms of, you asked me what my favorite part of my career was. Honestly, I think it's just, I've had great matches, but I think being known as somebody that was reliable and having a good reputation outside of the ring, because to me, that's just as important sometimes. If you have a bad match, right, you're going to get forgiven. But if you're a jerk, someone that's impossible to do work with or business with, and you end up burning a bridge, sometimes that never leaves you. That's unfortunate, because I've seen some really good, talented people lose everything and not get booked anymore because of their personality, their attitude, and the way they handle their business. So I think just kind of being that reliable person that would always show up on time and do his job. And I was never difficult to work with. I never told somebody I'm not doing that move or I want to win. So foolish. But yeah, I would say just overall, like some good matches, some good friendships, and just the overall experience of doing it and then walking away on my own terms instead of being carried away on a stretcher. That's kind of nice too.
Very wise.
Yeah. John, if you could, I will finish out on this question. I'll just put it out to you. If you could go back to WWE for a match, and if you could go to AEW for a match, who would be the 2 guys, one from each company, that you would fight?
Well, for WWE, I mean, Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle were the 2 guys. If I could have had a match with one of those guys, even just on an independent show, I mean, that would have been a dream. Those are 2 of my favorites for sure. AEW, I mean, most of the guys in AEW I've wrestled already. I wrestled Punk and Danielson, Samoa Joe, multiple times. I wrestled MJF on an independent show in 2018 too, before he went to AEW. So out of the current crop of guys there, well, the Ring of Honor Pure Champ of Shibata is really good, and I'd like to get in the ring with him, especially in a Pure Rules match, because I was a Pure Champ for so long, and I kind of excel in those matches with that with those rules and that style. So probably that. But there's so many good workers in the world, and I never want to say this is the only person I want to work with, because there's just so many good guys. And if you're a professional, you're going to try to have the best match with somebody, no matter what their skill level is. And excuse me, I've had really good matches with guys that were not really highly rated. Like, oh, this guy's new; he's only a couple of years in, and then you go out and blow the roof off the place. So, I would say the two guys I mentioned, Angle and Guerrero, but AEW wise, any of those guys now are still going strong. So I think I could handle myself against all of them.
Yep, John, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It was a real pleasure to catch up with you. For people looking to follow John, I'll put his Twitter and links down below, and you can keep on top of what he's up to. And he said, "Never say never." We'll see him on the screen soon, I'm sure, at some point. So, John, thanks a million, man.
I don't use Twitter much, but once in a while, if I make an appearance, I check it, because I know there's like a million things. I just kind of have to clear it. You know what I mean? But I'm on Facebook more often, because I think you can write more there. And I feel like Twitter's more toxic than Facebook. But social media in general can be toxic if you use it that way. So,
yeah.
But I appreciate
be nice on social media, folks.
Yes, be nice to each other. No bullying.
Yeah. Thanks a million, John.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks,
John.
Thank you.